Alright everyone, welcome back to another Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes video with Fat Phil, and one thing I hadn't had a chance to cover yet was the update to Relic Delta that we got. I think it was last Friday, so it's been a couple of days now. There was a survey that came out. I will link that survey down below if you haven't had a chance to take it, but I wanted to give you guys my thoughts and more importantly show you a pattern I'm beginning to notice, and I think it's going to change a bit of how I'm looking at Relic Delta, the suggestions I'm giving, the feedback. I want to give you all a lot of credit that I think being extremely vocal about this, having your voice heard, is extremely important to this game right now. Capital Games is 100% listening. You would be foolish to think that they're not hearing your concerns, that they're not listening to the feedback we as the community are giving. The question that I have, the question many other people have, which is a very fair question, obviously comes down to how much will they listen and to what extent will that be. So let's get in here, folks. Please like, subscribe, comment. Got to give a shout out to our channel members as always for their continued support. If you guys are ever interested in joining channel memberships, that link is below, along with a link to Discord. Really just appreciate it, guys. I know it's been hit or miss on the channel lately. We got, as I've been explaining all along, we've got a lot of things going on in the Fat Phil family that it is what it is, so I just appreciate it. Thank you guys again. Let's get in here. Let's talk about some Relic Delta. All right, so we're going to go to the screen capture here. And again, I'm going to kind of talk through this as we answer this survey. So I've got my random Gmail up there. So select your GP range. And I do want to give credit to this. The ranges they showed here of this 2 million gap is really important because it does give them a better idea of the level of player you are. I think, it's not so many that you're like, all right, going up by 1 million every single time. It's a wide enough range that you're kind of getting a general grasp of what that player is. So I'm 12 to 14 million. The first question is, all right, what is your satisfaction based on the current Relic Delta modifier? Numbers, see attached image, blue is the new numbers. So those new numbers now, it is instead of 10%, it's now 5% for one relic difference. Instead of a 20% increase of damage, it's a 10% increase at 2. 3 levels is 50%, 4 is 100, and 5 is 200. Those are unchanged, the last 3 levels. On the defensive reduction side of things, it's gone from a 10% reduction to a 5% reduction, 17% to 10%, and then 33, 50, and 66 remaining unchanged. So your responses you could have here, I'm satisfied with these numbers and don't think they need to be changed. I think Relic Delta needs further scaling for this to be considered fair for everyone playing. I would prefer to see a different kind of progression system, even if there's monetization involved. I think Relic Delta is a mistake and should not be brought into the game in any form. When I read through this and I really want to give them good feedback, I'm definitely not satisfied. While I definitely don't like Relic Delta, I can understand why they think this is the solution. And I think answering this question, hey, Relic Delta's a mistake, should not be brought to the game in any form. The problem is, answering this is basically this. These two responses are basically the same thing. They're not going to do nothing with this game. They're going to create another level of progression. So, and this kind of goes into a little bit of understanding a bit of the psychology, if you will, around a survey. Oftentimes when you're asking survey questions, you're going to give multiple answers that are the same or ask the same question multiple times just with different wording. And that way you truly can gauge the responses from people. You don't just ask, one question, you ask a couple, and a lot of times they're very similar. And this is one that I would say that. If you're saying you don't want it to be brought to the game in any form, then you want a new progression system. That's what you're saying. So for me, I think it needs further scaling to be considered fair for everyone playing. And that's a very specific wording there. Fair for everyone playing. Not just fair to the people who are spending, but to the people who are not spending, right? That's talking about everybody, fair for everyone. I think this needs further scaling. What, if any, Relic Delta level damage modifications are too high? And again, they have the same numbers here. For me, when I look at this, at first, if you remember, I had said, hey, why don't you just do 5% per relic level? But if you go back and you read their original post, they talk about it being a non-linear system. Non-linear basically means if it was on a, it's not going to be represented by a line. They don't want it to be this even level of progression. They want it to be almost an exponential change, right? Almost like on a curve. They want it to, really get like, they don't want it to be nice and steady. They want it to just, skyrocket, right? So like, it's going to be kind of like this and then, it's going right up. And so when I look at that and I thought about my response more, I was like, you know what? I think all of them are too high. Because while 5% for one level doesn't sound bad, it's leaving that much less room for level 3, 4, and 5. So that's one part of my answer is, again, thinking through level 3, 4, and 5, I don't want to start at a certain level and then need to get to a non-linear way. But also, the one thing that has not been done in testing is adding Datacrons. They've added Omicrons, you can adjust certain things, but they've not yet added Datacrons. And that, to me, is a really important part of this game that does need to be adjusted here. And I'm going to show an example. If I'm going up in this fight here in Squad Arena, and I'm going to fight, say, this guy's, Hondo team. If I go fight this team without the Datacron, I might feel, hey, 5% feels okay. But I fight it with this Datacron, with the stats and the level, all these things. If I do this, all of a sudden, your discussion point kind of changes a bit. Now you're going to have a lot. Okay, you know what? 5% is way too high based on the Datacron here. And again, it needs to be the specific Datacron. I'm not just talking about, like myself where I'm running the, on my team right now. I've got like the generic focus cron here just for all the stats. I'm talking the specific, hey, deal this damage, do this, do that. Another good example, think about Gungans. That Gungan team in the last cycle, you had that, hey, if Gungans have full health and protection, they're going to deal 100% more damage. How does that Datacron feel with this Relic Delta? Those are the kind of tests that I think need to happen, and that's why I think 5% is too high. If 5% feels okay without Datacrons, with Datacrons, it's going to feel that much different. So that's why I said it's too high, and I think that's one area of the testing I really need to get worked out, because Datacrons are a massive part of PvE, or a massive part of this game, right? They are huge, and they need to be, understood. So I said all of the above there. Which, again, then brings which of these are too low? None of the above, right? That's pretty self-explanatory there on these thresholds. If you say all the above here, you got to say none of the above here that are too low. One thing I do notice, and I wanted to bring up before we move on to the rest of the questions here, it does seem like they're not as, I'd say, concerned on the level 1 and 2 as much as they are 3, 4, and 5. That those bigger gaps in relics, they want them, you get to get far more punished for that, which again is, I think, a sort of response, if you will, to how a lot of these counters kind of come to be. Think about, the resistance team that a lot of people have used to counter certain things. That's a team that most of us have at Relic 5, and that was beating Ahsoka. Well, now, if your Ahsoka is Relic 10, you're going to be subject to that damage penalty and damage increase with that team. That some of those off-meta counters that we use that are significantly less relic levels and work because of a, kind of just taking advantage of the kit, taking advantage of the situation. I think that's where that's where they really seem to be trying to target, is those areas, think about like your Dr. Aphra Scoundrels versus Jabba. Normally, your Aphra team is far lower relic levels than the Jabba team you're going up against. They might want to kind of put an end to that because they don't want that happening anymore, or at least they want Relic Delta negatively impacting those things. So I think that's kind of the direction that Relic Delta's meant to do. It's not so much about making Galactic Legend fights that much harder against each other, but I think some of those off-meta counters is where they're really targeting here. And again, I think the thresholds kind of support that, because most of our GLs aren't going to be more than a relic or two different from each other. Maybe initially with Relic 10 coming in, you might have some 7 versus 10, which will be scary, but I think eventually it's going to be a significant, hey, GLs are going to be roughly in that same area. What is your greatest concern you have about Relic Delta? The unfairness of the advantage paying players will have over free-to-play. I feel like this will encourage bad habits or force players either into specific guilds or to quit entirely. This feels like it's punishing non-spenders too much. GAC and Territory War will become a paywalled feature with no other way to recover lost potential rewards. So, again, when you look at this, there's two questions that are very similar. The unfairness of the advantage paying players will have, and this feels like punishing non-spenders. Those are both the same thing. I answered this in all of the above. I think all of these are very valid concerns to have. The unfairness of paying players will have over free-to-play is huge. Hey, you spend on Relic 10, you've got the advantage of the Relic level and the Relic Delta that's happening. Encourage bad habits or force players into specific guilds or to quit entirely. 100% agree with this. And what we mean by encouraging bad habits is there will be some gamesmanship with Relic levels that right now doesn't really exist. Here's a good example. Let's go to a character like Galactic Legends Ray. Right now, when you use Ray, oftentimes you're kind of pulling in a team like this. I'm just going to go into my, I think is there a Galactic, of course there's not a Galactic Challenge open. So let's go create a squad here just for the sake of argument. Create new squad. Let's go with, oops, that's Ahsoka. Ray and Ben, right? Let's say, use this. I have them both in roughly the same area of relics because I want Ben to be just as much of a threat as Ray. In the new system, a character like Ray at Relic 10 will be far more valuable than having a Relic 8 Ray and a Relic 8 Ben, because you just want to punish the opponent with Ray. You're not as concerned about whether Ben drops below 50% health, or you're worried about if Ray does. So if I can limit the amount of damage that she brings in, that's what you're going to do. You're going to see instances like that. You're going to see the instances of characters like Ahsoka being, hey, just take her to Relic 10. Don't worry about the rest of the team. So those characters, another one would be Leia, right? Leia's another one. These tank type GLs who they're kind of the entire goal to kill. I think these are the characters that you're going to be looking at and saying, hey, you know what? Lord Vader, you're just going to increase their relic levels. You're not as concerned with the rest of their team with Relic Delta because the rest of the team isn't the threat. The threat is if the GL sticks around long enough, they're going to start hammering you. So I kind of think that this Relic Delta will sort of encourage that type of gamesmanship with some of those characters and will, in essence, kind of, again, like they said, kind of cause those bad habits. When you think about specific guilds or quit entirely, every time they've done stuff like this, guilds fracture. And I think guilds will fracture here because now it's no longer enough that you've just invested in Datacrons and Territory War Omicrons. If you don't have the relic levels to support them, there will 1000% be players who will have to leave their guild. Again, punishing spenders too much, or punishing non-spenders too much, that goes along with this one, right? But then the big one, GAC and Territory War will become a paywalled feature in no other way, which again, kind of very similar to the first two, this one and this one. But I think with this, where I'd argue is, imagine you're already going up against these people who have more stuff than you. Now they've got more relic levels. It's going to be a lot harder to beat them purely based off of what they're going to be able to perform. And then you're not going to be able to climb because you're not getting as much rewards as them. And those rewards can go towards more relics, and it just compounds on itself. Then they ask, where do you see yourself benefiting most from Relic Delta being added to the game? I see myself getting more value in my specific relic investments. I no longer see my high relic team getting beaten by a grossly under relic team. I see myself having easier times in PvE content like TB Conquest and other events. All the above, none of the above. This is a question you really have to be careful with there. I was very careful and I only selected this one. Because you've got to think, they say, where do you see yourself benefiting? I read all these and see it as a negative to me. I see myself getting more value. I'm looking at this as I see my opponents getting more value from their relic investments. I see my opponents' high relic teams getting beaten by mine no longer happening. So that these are all detrimental to me, right? I'm kind of thinking in the reverse, which is not what they want. So, but yeah, I see it helping me in territory battles where my phase 1, 2, and 3 are going to be that much easier with higher relic squads. Yeah, that's great. But That's really the only place I really see this impacting me in a positive way. Every other way, it's kind of negative. And with that TB, I've been preaching this all along. That is one of the most BS things they've ever said, because it can't negatively impact you in territory battles when you're not allowed to under-relic a planet. You can't bring Relic 6 on Dathomir. You can't bring Relic 7 on the Haven-class medical station. So yeah, it's not going to negatively impact you ever in TB because you don't let us try to have it negatively impact us. Finally, they ask, what Relic levels do you think should be made more accessible to non-paying players? And they've got, 1 through 9 here. Being perfectly honest, I think Relics 1 through 7 are extremely free-to-play accessible. However, when they added Relic 8 and they added Relic 9, where you need everything else below that added into the character, it changed a lot of my opinion on that. And again, that's a very important thing to understand, is that like 1 through 7, when they were first released, is one of the best things this game has ever done. They're very well balanced. They were, it was hard to get 6, it was hard to get 7. It wasn't just like throwing it on willy-nilly, because those resources weren't really as readily available as they are now, and that's because Relic 8 and 9 exist. So when I really think about this, and I'm like, all right, what am I looking at? I kind of said that I think 6, 7, 8, and 9 are the Relic levels that we need more access to for, the non-spending players. 1 through 5, I feel, are in a really good place. There's enough resources there. It's a death by numbers kind of game. There's a lot of the resources that you need, but they are accessible. There are a lot of ways to get through that. There's, smart investment decisions. There is, nodes and other things you can do to obtain those resources. 6, 7, 8, and 9 is where I notice a lot of players who are free to play struggle. Those Electrum Conductors and Zimbaldo cards begin to add up at Relic 8. They add up at Relic 9, and it becomes that much more challenging to invest characters to Relic 7, because you need those materials to go to 8 and 9. If they weren't needed, you wouldn't need to worry about them as much, but they are. And then, of course, with 8 and 9, those resources are just so vastly, challenging to obtain, very rare. Most players haven't been interacting. They absolutely need to give us more access to those when adding a new Relic level, and particularly if you're going to start punishing lower Relic investment, you need to try to, we're going to try to make that happen. So that's my responses to this survey. Again, I will link it down below. I'm not going to submit this because as much as I want my opinions heard, I've already submitted it. And the little bit of honor that I do have and good faith that I would like to show to Capital Games is that I'm willing to give you feedback. I gave it honestly once already. I'm willing to put this for other people to take, but I don't want to submit it more than once. That's just, hey, it's where I am. I hope they hear this. I hope you guys, take this survey. If you haven't already, again, link down below. But I really appreciate it, guys. I know Relic Delta is not a popular conversation. While I don't like it, again, I can at least respect why they feel it needs to be added to the game. And based on the other alternatives they presented to us in their fireside chat, I understand why this is the solution. And I'm willing to accept it, barring they continue to adjust the thresholds to an acceptable level, and especially once they start testing Datacrons. That's my thoughts, folks. Let me know what you think down below. Like, subscribe, comment. I love you all. May the force be with you, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers, my friends.